Good afternoon. Welcome to this latest DMU research event. I'm Professor Julia J.A. I'm Professor of Law and Social Justice and Director of the Centre for Law, Justice and Society. It's my great pleasure to chair this webinar, which has a focus on the impact of COVID-19 in the context of World Social Justice Day. So today we have 4 leading PhD scholars. They'll each deliver a speed lecture, followed by a panel discussion and a question and answer session. So our opening talk is called The Social Injustice of Reproduction, Housing Conditions in Leipzig, East Germany. And it's by Leon Reichle, who is a member of the Centre for Urban Research on Austerity. Hi, Leon. Yes, she's going to explore the stratified effects of urban restructuring in the East German city of Leipzig and look at the commodification of housing, where houses have increasingly become seen as an asset rather than a home. So we look forward to hearing from you, Leon.
Hey, a warm welcome also from me, and thanks for this opportunity to talk about my work. So I'll be talking about the social injustice of reproduction and housing conditions in Leipzig, East Germany, which is where I am at the moment and where I'll take you in the next 10 minutes. So I'm a PhD student at the Center for Urban Research on Austerity, and I've conducted a 1-year multi-method qualitative and ethnographic case study in Leipzig, which is a city in East Germany. So here I'm looking at housing and social reproduction. Now, what is social reproduction? It refers to the activities and attitudes, behaviors and emotions, responsibilities and relationships directly involved in the maintenance of life on a daily basis and intergenerationally. And even though housing is not the only arena of social reproduction, it's a quite central one, and it's also one that has been at the basis for many struggles in the past years on a global scale. And this is because, as Julia already said, housing is increasingly also seen as a commodity, which means it's financialized and it's an asset that is supposed to make money. So I've looked at urban restructuring and this commodification in Leipzig since German reunification, which was in 1989. And I argue that urban restructuring in Leipzig is built on 3 pillars, which is, first of all, of course, the marketization of housing, because previously under state socialism, housing was state organized in East Germany. Secondly, as you can see in the bottom right graph, it's contingent on shrinkage and regrowth. So after reunification, there was a massive exodus of population with deindustrialization. And then when the city began to grow again around 2010, the administration was kind of overwhelmed in regulating the newly flourishing housing market. And this is thirdly also contingent on a persistent urban austerity, which basically means that the city has neither the financial nor the juridical means to adequately and timely regulate this process of commodification. And in the top left, you can see all the restructuring projects currently going on. But let me turn to the city's tenants, because when talking about social injustice, it's of course them who I'm interested in. So Leipzig in Germany has a lot of nicknames. It's referred to as Leipzig or the New Berlin or the City of Dreamers. And recently, an urban scholar has provocatively asked whether we shouldn't rather just call it the city of the poor. And this is because despite unemployment sinking in the last 15 years, economic precarity in Leipzig is still pretty high. So by that, I mean that a bit less than a quarter of the population is at a risk of poverty, but simultaneously pressured by the now rising rents. So what I've done is I've looked at the daily life realities of these precarious tenants. And in the following, I want to introduce 3 groups of tenants to you that are particularly vulnerable to these developments. And through that, I will highlight how housing commodification impacts social reproduction on a level of daily life, on a community level, but also on a more long-term structural level. So first of all, I've looked at long-term tenants. I've spoken to long-term tenants. And by this, I mean tenants who have lived in Leipzig already prior to German reunification. So these tenants often have faced job losses with deindustrialization and also a disruption of community after reunification when a lot of people migrated to the West. And now this disruption of community is continued or perpetuated with the tightening housing market and incipient displacement. Like an elderly man told me quite angrily, but also with a notion of desperation when he said, all of us moved away to where the rents are cheaper, but where should I go if my rent goes up? I have nowhere else to go. So this kind of shows what happens at a community level when a housing market gets tightened and people start to be displaced. So secondly, I looked at who I call the early adventurers, and they are young students who are responsible for these different nicknames of Leipzig, like the city of dreamers, because they have built a lot of subcultural spaces in the city especially when it was still very vacant and rents were very cheap. But by now, both their subcultural projects and these tenants themselves are under increasing pressure from upgrading. So one example is this student who I've interviewed and whose house has been sold to an investor maybe 2 years ago. And this investor is now trying to get rid of the tenants so he can conduct luxury refurbishment and sell the house. And this student tells me that a permanent worry at home is this caution to always do everything right, to know if we make one mistake, we will be exploited without mercy and thrown out. It could get worse any moment, but there's nothing you can do. It's just exhausting. So I think this quote really nicely highlights what happens to social reproduction on a psychosocial level of daily life. So this kind of pressure and anxiety in the sphere of home where you're actually supposed to just like rest and withdraw from the world a little bit. So thirdly, I've looked at immigrant tenants, and they are, especially refugees among them, are particularly vulnerable to the housing market, not just because of economic precarity, but also because of parallel racist discrimination on the housing market. And this is shown by a quote from an Iranian woman who talks about many of her friends. I know many that were really motivated to learn the language and do an apprenticeship at first, but then they had the pressure to start working so they could find a flat, so they just took the jobs that no German wants to do. I know a lot of men doing night shifts at DHL just so they can find a flat. And this kind of shows that landlords don't really want to rent out to immigrant tenants, and they will do it, they are even less inclined to do so if they are dependent on transfers. So I think the last category exemplifies particularly how housing injustice kind of perpetuates structural injustice and inequality on a long-term and structural level. So what do I make out of this? Theoretically, I try to capture these phenomena with the concept of residential alienation, because it's both more general and more, let's say, fine-grained than like displacement measures. And it is a concept that captures the link between the structural level of housing commodification. So housing is an asset, somebody's trying to make profit that comes with certain rationalities. And at the same time, it's a home, and there are psychosocial experiences of tenants resulting from that in their daily lives, but also on a structural level, on a general level. So what my research shows really nicely in Leipzig is how residential alienation kind of reproduces social injustice. But now let me finally lose some words about COVID-19, because after all, this event is entitled Research on the COVID-19 Crisis. Basically, I can say, as a bunch of other researchers have said up to now, that COVID-19 is a kind of magnifying glass for what's going on. So in terms of housing conditions, this means that prior injustices are exacerbated even more under COVID. And this shows, for example, in the case of large immigrant families who are trapped in shelters because they can't find housing, or they are trapped in too small flats. And in both cases, they are under increased risk of infection. but it also shows in the case of women who are burdened more by care work when in lockdown their kids can't go to school. And finally, it also, of course, shows in the case of people who are in precarious jobs because they are prone to lose these jobs more easily, and then also they don't have the savings to pay their rents. And even though there was a rent moratorium in Germany for the periods of lockdown, these people are already anxious about the debt piling up and the consequences this is going to imply for them. So with this slightly depressing outlook, I thank you for your attention. And I'll pass on to my next colleague, Amina. Thank you.
Thank you, Leon, and welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Amina Chitembo, and I am a second-year PhD student. And my research is looking at migrants, women's self-inclusion, highly skilled migrant women's self-inclusion into leadership. And my talk today, it's going to be a little bit of a mix with my research and the current reality. So navigating self and otherness, highly skilled migrant women's self-inclusion into leadership positions. My research is very much focused within the UK, especially England, and within the public sector. Where I'm at right now is I've just finished my data collection, so I'm going to share with you a few preliminary results, the themes that are coming through as I do my data analysis. So let me start. Right. Yeah, so if you got up and searched for highly skilled migrants in the UK, this is pretty much what you're going to find on screen. On the left is a screenshot of the search results that I did a few days ago when I was preparing this slide. And also this is quite a big image that you'll see. All this has become very strong as a result of Brexit. And the talk that you would hear is migrants, and what would come to mind is all the crisis that's going on and the things that migrants are doing. What you don't get to hear much about until around last year, when the COVID reality set in, is the difference that migrants make within the UK. So my research looks at highly skilled migrants who are based in the voluntary sector. And these highly skilled migrants are people that come to the UK and other developed countries for economic reasons. They come here to work, so they arrive in the country with their qualification. So one of the key themes around my research is looking at the descaling. So first and foremost, today's we're looking at social justice, and so I thought it would be important to share with you how my research links to the Sustainable Development Goals, which you may or may not have already heard about. So in terms of gender equality, reduced inequality, and justice and strong institutions, it's around the contribution towards that. And on the other hand, there's the contribution towards inclusion and access for migrant women themselves, their families in their host countries, which is like the UK, and their families that they leave back home. So the reality is that migrants send around 6 billion, around 600 billion to their, migrants sent home around 600 billion in remittances just in 2017, which is 3 times the official assistance that governments in the developed countries send to their native countries. And in that 6 million, the 600 billion, the women are included in that figure, and usually they are the ones that will send the most. Research has shown that. So these economies, both the host economies, because as you could see from the COVID situation last year, up until now, most of the people that you find on the front line will be migrants who come here to fill up positions. However, there is a bit of a juxtaposition in terms of the reality of the migrant as a highly skilled employee that comes to do work, and those that what you hear around the situation of migrants in the UK. At this stage, I'm not going to go into details in terms of the theories that I've looked at, but I just want to share with you a bit of a background. So, the University of Essex has conducted a large-scale study which looked at the descaling and looked at the ethnic hierarchies in terms of the workforce within the UK. And that found that that ranged a lot from, as you can see, 15% of those migrants from EU member states, and on the other hand is the qualification that vary to 81% of Black, African, and Caribbean migrants. UK-born minorities, UK-born ethnic minorities are more highly qualified than white British, the counterparts the studies found. Black African migrants, 57%, 28% of Caribbeans. African migrants appear to be well integrated into high share of citizenship in that, which means those that have already received their indefinite leave to remain, or those that have got their citizenship in the UK. However, most Black African migrant women are overqualified for their jobs. So they find themselves in the lower paid jobs. So one of the issues around that, according to Zwisen and de Meriva, is that most of the migrants, when they come in, when you look at the UK system, it will we look for people that have got high qualifications, but the jobs that they are coming to do in the UK are more likely to be lower paid jobs. And even when you look at the skills and also the health services and the social care services where migrants come to work mostly are lower paid positions. Now, why is this important to look at? This is important to look at because there is, at the moment, very limited discourse in practice around highly skilled migrants. So when you put the two words together, highly skilled and leadership, those two you don't seem to find much research on that. There's also limited research on career progression, because once a migrant comes to the UK, they come in as an employee straight away. After 5 years or 6 years, they get their indefinite leave to remain. They are now considered as a British citizen, and they have just as much the rights as anybody who was born in this country. The only difference is the system. How well do they integrate into the system? How well do they understand the system? And that is the area where my research is focused, in terms of exploring how the migrant women themselves see themselves in the system, and as they aspire to go into leadership. And hopefully this will increase the research, and then we'll start looking up, getting better results. So my data collection involved 30 qualitative semi-structured interviews with 2 cohorts of women. So I looked at one group of women that were already holding a leadership position. These are all highly skilled, highly qualified migrant women. And the other cohort was the ones that are in professional positions, administrative positions, or lower and middle management positions. So as you can see here, the description for the highly skilled and highly qualified, and why I use in the research both highly skilled and highly qualified, because as you see, one can be highly skilled but not necessarily qualified. But the visa qualifications, the prerequisite for coming to the UK to come and work, is somebody has to be considered highly qualified. So distribution of the respondents so far that I've had within my data collection, out of those 30, about as you can see, 56.8% of those have at least a master's level qualification, and 16.2 have a postgraduate diploma. And then on the other side, it's the distribution of the organization type where they work. So 58% of the sample that I looked at is in health and social care. So these are the areas that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 in them, the health and social care. And so some of the responses that I got, the characteristics, the common drivers for people wanting, these are people that are aspiring to be in a leadership position or are already in a leadership position. So some of the characteristics that were coming through are, as you can see, the high qualifications. They believe they have hard work. They have faith that they can work, and a lot of self-belief that goes with actually traveling from one country to another country to go and live there. They have family responsibilities both in the UK and at home, and then there's resilience and the pay and reward. So what are some of the themes that are coming through from these women? So when we look at the barriers and challenges on those that are aspiring into leadership, a lot of barriers that they have to deal with to do with negative talk around migrants. So day in, day out, you're hearing talk on the media around migrants, discrimination within the organization, empty praises. A lot of them have alluded to the fact that they get a lot of praise because of their hard work. So the employers will agree that they are hardworking. However, that does not move beyond, it does not translate into their career mobility, getting higher positions. They feel like they're always treated as the outsider. So there's the them and us. There's excessive scrutiny on them, so that affects them a lot in terms of going to work and looking over your shoulder all the time. These are some of the things that were coming out. I feel some of the issues include accents and names. So the accents, the way they speak, and also the name that they carry. So you're more likely to be seen favorably if you carry a white sounding name as opposed to your origin name. Their survival mechanism, a lot of them talked about having a strong mindset and just lose interest in even trying. So one person said, I've tried 13 times in 6 years to move from my position to the next position. And I see new people that come in that have less qualification, less experience than me, get promoted. So that can be quite disheartening. The immigration negativity, this fatigue, this has to do with the number of changes within the immigration system in the UK. And in case you're wondering, the UK has had 30 major changes since the year 2000 within around the immigration policies. Fear of confrontation. So I just go to work. I don't want confrontation, so I just avoid that, and I don't want to apply higher, because if I do that, then I'll put myself out for confrontation. And the last one is they just leave and become self-employed. So one of the biggest issues has been that people end up leaving their substantive position to go and work in an agency and be self-employed, and then go back to the public sector organization as an agency. That way they feel they're not part of the bureaucracy. Those that are already in leadership, so in terms of their survival toolkits that I was asking for and what support they've had along the way, it's around picking the battles carefully. So they are very careful as well in terms of how they put themselves out into the organization. Learning the language. Now, this is not about learning English language. It's about learning the language that's spoken in the organization, being part of the team. Mentorship. This group spoke a lot about having mentors and having sponsors to see them up to that position, which as opposed to the other group, which don't seem to look at that as one of their survival or support mechanisms. Owning the difference. So if I'm a Black woman, I need to own my Blackness. I need to know my space. I need to know where I am. And the people that are in leadership usually tend to show that confidence and owning their space and not seeing themselves as being disadvantaged because they are in that position, regardless of what comes towards them. One of the things that everybody that was in the leadership side is somebody within the organization saw the strength in them. And so they call that the one angel that saw them and helped their career to move upwards into the position that they are in. Some of the challenges, some of the things that they have to overcome are things like having thick skin. So regardless of what happens, so discrimination is there, just like in the other group, but having a thick enough skin to be able to weather that. Losing yourself a little bit. This was a little bit difficult for me because it's one of those things that you find that you have to take away who you are to be able to be accepted. So one of the examples that was given was that as Black women, we have this, we speak with our hands and we are very expressive and we can have a sharp voice, but they felt that they have to lose that. And somebody even said, I have to put my hands under my chair when I'm talking so that I don't become too expressive, so that people don't feel threatened by that. So quite difficult to hear that. Self-confidence, as I mentioned, lots of confidence that goes with understanding how the politics, how to play the game within the organization, and keeping away from the office politics. So whatever is happening within organization, making sure that, just like picking the battles carefully, making sure that somebody's keeping themselves to themselves. And that's one of the strategies that they picked up that has helped them to reach to this stage. So all these are just themes that are coming out, and there is a lot that is going to come out of this. However, in terms of the contribution for today, the contribution for this research is the importance of this research is getting this understanding, because lots of research that you find, even if the few papers that you'll find are looking at it from the organization point of view. So it's about giving the migrants women the voice themselves to be able to talk to their issues. Hopefully this will be picked up by other researchers so that we can increase the literature within the area, this area, and also future and further research around migrant women and hearing it from their own narrative and their own voice. So thank you very much. This is the end of my presentation. I've got some references here that I used. And now I'm going to invite Jessica to speak to you. Thank you very much.
Finally, there is a change in the order. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's event. My name is Georgios Kitsoleris, and my research study is about social mobility in my country, Greece, and the role of education. I will try to link the social mobility with the topic of social justice, and I will also adjust some evidence from the financial crisis in Greece with the context of the COVID-19 crisis. Is the movement within the social hierarchy. People have the possibility to change their class. The groups can be divided by the income of their occupation or wealth or social status. An open society provides opportunities to their citizens to move upwards, while social mobility also leads to the opposite direction, generally for people who don't have the capabilities to maintain their status. The importance of social mobility in every society is acknowledged. If the resources are allocated in a fair way in a society, this is going to improve the social cohesion and welfare. The expectation and aspirations of different generations that their life's outcomes are not associated only with the socioeconomic background, but mainly by their efforts and merit, can reinforce the sense of justice in a state. In addition, this state benefits from the talents and skills of all citizens without losing valuable human capital, and it may reach better welfare more easily. Living in a country with lower social mobility, the citizens have lower aspirations and motivations for greater efforts that could lead to more economic efficiency and development. The association between inequality and mobility continues to be investigated, but usually a country with higher mobility has also lower income inequality. We can consider that there is not a clear and unique mechanism which is the driver behind this link, but education plays an important role. The most debates focus on the inequality in the world, which is an indicator of outcomes, but perhaps the problem is not mainly on the outcome, but the origin of each person. Intergenerational mobility refers to a comparison between what the children have achieved in their life in a social and economic perspective, comparing with the achievements of their parents. The measurement of intergenerational mobility is considered as to be an indicator of equality in opportunities. When the mobility is high, this is an indicator of a healthy society with opportunities for everybody independently of his family's background. Zero correlation between the parents and the offspring's achievements means that people from poor and disadvantaged families have the chance to change socioeconomic status during their lifetime and take elite positions as well. Insufficient intergenerational mobility is referred also as intergenerational persistence. The economic mobility focuses on intergenerational comparisons of income, while the sociologist's view tends to focus on other ordered categorical variables like educational attainment or occupation that can describe and associate the status of different generations. Due to the financial crisis in Greece was a shock in the economy, like the economic shock of COVID-19, I will present some primary results of my research, and we can consider that similar consequences may occur by nowadays crisis. Income mobility indicates the changes in the economic status of an individual from one period to another. This term is intragenerational mobility, or comparing to his parents between two generations in this case. The term is intergenerational mobility. The most standard issue to measure income mobility is with the intergenerational elasticity of earnings. Starting with the table 1. Comparing the earnings of parents and children, we can compute the extent of the latter's income depends on the first one. When the number of intergenerational elasticity is close to 0, it means that there is complete intergenerational mobility. The children's income is not correlated with parents' economic background. Opposite to this, a number close to 1 can be translated that the link between the incomes of these two generations is absolute and there is no mobility in this society. I would like to point out that the crisis in Greece started in 2010 and ended in 2018. The indicator in Greece increased from 0.19 to 0.31-32 during the financial crisis. This is a signal for lower income mobility. That number means that if parents' income is 10,000 euros lower than the mean income, 32% of this difference will affect the incomes of their child. Their child will earn 3,000 euros lower than the average income in this country. In other words, if we have two families with different parents' income, 32% of this difference of the difference in parents' income will be transmitted to their children. On the other hand, during the crisis, more people improve their relative positions when we focus on the intragenerational mobility. Figure 1 illustrates the proportion of upward mobility, downward mobility, and no transitions along the income distribution divided by deciles. It is interesting that the peak of upward intergenerational income mobility was at the center of recession in 2014. This can be explained by the fact that people with small losses or stable incomes experienced positional gains. Therefore, a crisis can also lead to a redistribution of population in income ranks. Overall, due to the economic recession, 73% of people changed income decile during the first period of crisis. The negative issue is that the starting point in the income ladder shapes income stability concerning the intergenerational mobility. Much more persistence at both tails of the distribution creates sticky floors and ceilings, as you can notice in the figure 2. While larger absolute income changes are expected at the bottom, this persistence can be explained by at least 2 ways. First, these changes are insufficient to push these people higher, and secondly, the long-term unemployment, material deprivation, and poverty can generate long-lasting impacts for households on these floors. High persistence in the wealthiest decile creates sticky floors with a percentage above 60% remain there even after 3 years. Moreover, the higher transitions in the middle of distribution generally occurred by the fact that small changes in absolute terms cause relative mobility. This evidence confirms that the Greek crisis was able to have controversial effects in income mobility for the individuals. According to another aspect of mobility, the explosion of education has led to significant upward mobility in the previous decades. Intergenerational educational mobility in absolute terms increased among the birth cohorts, and it is almost entirely upward. Nowadays, 63% of younger people have completed higher educational level compared to their parents. However, educational inequalities have not declined. For instance, the probability of a child whose parent has a tertiary degree to complete tertiary education relative to the probability of a child whose parent has completed primary education in Greece to obtain a tertiary degree, it is 3.4 times higher. The crisis affected the intergenerational mobility in education with a small rise of inequality to access in tertiary education, especially for sons and families with bad financial backgrounds. The previous livelihood was 2.6 prior to the start of the crisis. The main similarities between the two crises are the sharp decline in GDP, the expected increase in unemployment, and the skyrocketing public debt ratio. No one can yet predict the impact of this crisis on social mobility, since it is necessary to compare the data of the individuals and generations that affected before and after. But evidence of the Greek crisis, and more generally from the global financial crisis of 2008, may provide insight into some of the expected results. In addition, it can help the efforts of policymakers to tackle issues such as poverty, exclusion, gender equality, unemployment, and social protection during and after the COVID period in a better way. It is also well known that the European Union did not react quickly to the financial crisis, and its response seemed to be impulsive. Early indications from the COVID-19 period show that the European Union and other countries are taking economic measures faster. Sometimes a crisis may be an opportunity. When we realize the importance of social mobility, we may be more open to policies that create gender opportunities for everyone. I believe that humanity, particularly in the Western world, has made a great deal of progress in the last century, but we can do more in the future. Let us not forget that no one chose the family in which they grow up, and that background may have played a more important role in our lives than we imagined. Thank you very much. And now, Ms. Jessica Gallagher, you have the floor.
Hi there, thank you so much, and apologies for the delay in changing order. That was down to my Wi-Fi. After a year of this, you think we would be more used to it. Today, I am going to be talking to you from the perspective of my PhD. I'm a second-year PhD student researching self-harm and suicide in English and Welsh prisons. And I wanted to focus on that specifically in the frame of social justice. The degree of civilization within a society can be judged by entering its prisons. It's a frequently used and often misattributed quote, used and seen within criminal justice academia, within prison cell walls and frequently within judgments and books on the topic. And there's very strong argument that a frequently used quote can become overused and lose its relevance. But actually, for the next 10 minutes, I'd like us to all consider the relevancy of it and just consider how, if we were to walk into a prison today, all of us listening, all of us watching, would we like what we see? Would what we see reflect on how we would like to be viewed as a society? And I'd like to kind of point over the next few minutes that actually I think that you'll notice that the failings that we see within the prisons are both distressing and chaotic. I'm going to focus on how these failings, as well as reflecting on us as a society, set up those that are incarcerated to fail almost immediately. As soon as they've stepped into a prison, we always have a foregone conclusion on how things are going to happen as soon as they leave. And that is a major issue, because if our prisons aren't working, we need to have a look at why they're there, what needs to change within them. So as it is World Social Justice Day, I'm going to look at a failure to access as my primary reason for kind of working through these main topics. The kind of indicators of social justice as established by the UN are participation, equity, human rights, and access. And within the prison crisis currently, we're seeing a failure to access basic needs down to the environment of the prison system, a failure to provide for the future of those incarcerated, and our failure to provide effective education. And the mental health crisis demonstrates a failure to access good care, the impact on families, friends, and those in distress. Now, throughout the next 10 minutes, I'm going to discuss the prison crisis. Now, for those who haven't been aware of this, and many of you may not be, because it's something that is, while reported, the entire string of it is not necessarily known. Throughout the last decade, from about 2011 onwards, we've seen a decimation of our prison system due to either a few things. So first of all, the austerity cuts in 2010 through 2010, which demonstrated a 20% direct budget cut to the prison system and a 40% direct budget cut to the Ministry of Justice. This area is the second most hard hit in austerity after the NHS. As well as that, we've seen massive overcrowding, which has resulted from 20 to 30 years of political bias focused on the impact of prison as a solution, as an issue with prison has become, you must be tough on crime, we must be understanding less, condemning more. There will be this issue of prison as a complete solution has started to implicate those. So we've begun to see significant amounts of people in overcrowded prisons that are affecting their state of education, their state of environment, and the mental health implicitly. So these two factors, this financial loss that's resulted in understaffing, overcrowding, this increase in drugs and violence has implicated, as well as this general reliance on prison as a solution for all of the issues. So there are two reasons why you should care about the prison crisis and how it affects us. And I've tried to organise these in two reasons that are less theoretical than it's just very bad, because let's be honest, there's enough for us to care about at the moment. And I'm asking you to care about something that many of us are very far removed from, me including. So there are two reasons why you should care. I'll start with the first one. It's the reason why most people care about things, and that is financial. So the cost of reoffending, the cost that is caused to our community by people leaving prison and then reoffending within a year, is £18 billion. It's the annual economic and social cost for reoffending, not even considering the financial cost that comes to those who are involved in that. So the financial cost of families losing relatives back into the prison system, those being involved in crime, violent crime, and the impact on all of us. The nature of reoffending, something that I think is significantly forgotten about, is the fact that that means that there are crimes being committed again and again, which affects all of us, potentially our safety and our well-being. So it's a financial cost. When prisons don't work, it does affect us. It affects our taxes, affects how much it costs. It costs £26,000 to keep a single person in prison for a year, and there are currently 79,000 people in prison as of last Friday. So the financial cost is an easy way to understand the crisis, but the human beings is the one that I personally affiliate myself with the most. There are 79,000 people within the prison system, and the three issues that I'm about to talk to affects them all entirely. We have got 79,000 people living in conditions that are largely inhumane, distressing, chaotic. They are causing people to be more distressed, turn to drugs, violence. The impact on staff, healthcare staff, prison officers, all of those people is also huge. So two reasons to care. You don't have to care, but I feel like the financial cost and the humanity cost is an absolutely huge motivation. So first, I want to talk about the environment, and these pictures here are from a 2019 prison inspection report from HMP Bedford. This at the top is a mattress that's been left on the floor due to the bed being broken. This shower cubicle at the bottom is a shower cubicle, and those stains are blood stains. And that sign was on a ring door to represent the fact that there is massive pest infestations. Now, this is not just an HMP Bedford problem. This is something that we've seen all across the prison estate for the last decade, if not longer. Prisons are notoriously old, Victorian. For a lot of you, you're probably experiencing the snow at the moment. That is even colder in prisons without central heating or adequate heating. In the summer, when we see those 25, 26 degree days, prisons become like an oven. Even worse than that, we've got pest infestations, bloodstained corridors, kind of things falling apart, broken windows, getting in the cold, as well as that, the massive overcrowding that we're seeing throughout the last 10 years has resulted in cells that are being open, cells that are there for one person being shared between 2 or even 3, and that overcrowding also affects the living experience of those within prison. So the experience of being able to get food, being allowed out of your cells, to be able to exercise is a massive concern, because when there's too many people, there's not enough time to start safely. Combine that with the understaffing, there's not enough prison staff to make sure that's coordinated safely, to ensure that people can go to work, to their vocations, to travel around the prison safely. A lot of these prisons have kind of 1,000-2,000 people in them. Trying to navigate all of that through movement, which happens 3 or 4 times a day, is impossible, leading to many people being within their cells for 21 hours a day. And this is not even including the impact that we've seen as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Education is a massive concern within the prison system, and one that we know needs to be changed if we are going to have any impact upon reoffending. It's one of the biggest protective factors we have to ensure that people are protected on their when they leave prison, which many, 99% of our prison population are going to leave prison one day. With 62% of the prison population having a literacy rate under the age of an 11-year-old, the impetus to ensure that they are being educated, that they are receiving useful qualifications, whether that is educational or vocational, has a massive impact. Prisons that have things such as the Bad Boys Bakery, the Clink restaurant, places that have vocations for cleaning, for washing clothes, for building. I visited a prison in HMP Edinburgh where they had an entire workshop where they fixed up and gave back bicycles to the community so that children could ride them. That ability for those men to learn to build something, to give that back to the community, was huge. Education is a massive protective factor because it gives people a reason to focus on their future and for their family's future when they leave prison. If you can see there, for those who receive education, that reoffending reduces by 10% is a huge amount when we consider prison reoffending. We also see massive improvements with the Open University. So the Open University degree is one of the only areas of education that has remained steady throughout the last decade, with around 1,200 people studying a year. And interestingly, the Open University degree completion rate for those in prison is incredibly similar for those within the community. So for those who undertake degrees within the OU within prison are very likely to complete and pass at the same level as their community peers. And that should be commended, but it should be noticed that the reality is that the Open University control a lot of that, and that structure, that incredible learning, is not done by the prison service. So it says a lot about kind of external agencies having a role in improving education. But education is a massive protective factor, and one that we can requires money, but with money comes improvement, and improvement saves money in the long run when we look at that £18 billion reoffending figure. And then finally, my specialist research area is mental health, and an area that I could talk about for hours. Men and women in prison have much higher rates of mental health than within the community, and their mental health issues are more serious and often seen in the community. Psychosis and psychotic disorders, personality disorders, autism, schizophrenia, PTSD, all mental illnesses that require convoluted and sophisticated care, as well as potential medication, are not being provided in prison. We are seeing a massive crisis within the self-harm and suicidal nature within prison. The suicide rate reached an alarmingly disgusting record high in 2016 of 119 deaths. 90 deaths in 2019. We've lost around 1,000 people within the last decade to suicide, which is 1,000 preventable deaths and 1,000 families who have lost a person. Self-harming incidents are at a record high, with 60,000 incidents of self-harm in 2019, each representing someone in such acute distress that the only way they could deal with that was harming themselves. And the common argument regarding self-harm within prisons is that it's for attention, and that very frequently is the case, but that attention is for someone to be able to leave their cell, to be able to have a shower, to be able to have clean clothes and food. And the fact that someone feels the need to injure themselves for those incredibly basic human rights is alarming at best. I really hope I painted a picture of the current state of the prison crisis, and unfortunately I can't sugarcoat it or make it look any better than it is. It's an absolutely horrific state of affairs as it currently stands. It's an area that needs rapid improvement, and it needs us to care about it. It needs us to stop assigning those who are in prison as bad people who will be bad forever. 99% of those people will be leaving. There's only a few whole life orders within our prison system. As well as that, I know that a lot of people, the very common rebuttal to anything I say on prisons is they're bad people, they've done bad things. And yes, absolutely, they require punishment, and there will always be a place for prisons in our society. But the kind of punishment when you receive a custodial sentence is your deprivation of liberty, your deprivation from your normal life. That's the punishment. Anything above that, anything moving away from, living with pests, having to kill rats, having blood-stained showers, being so distressed that you may be harming yourself, at risk of killing yourself, receiving no education, being locked in a cell for 20 hours a day, is far beyond what was ever intended for custody when it is sentenced by a judge. That's all I have time for today, but thank you very much. And I'd like to introduce Professor Julia J.A. to run our panel session.
Yes, hello again. Can you hear me? Yes. 4 outstanding presentations, and you clearly illustrate how these questions of social injustice, human vulnerability, and structural inequalities all demand a broad policy approach. So it's very clear that the research that you're doing, it's not only very important, but it's very interesting, the way that you're putting the different factors together in your respective areas. So I would just like to start the discussion between ourselves off by saying, well, clearly, COVID-19 has thrown into sharp relief the important question of what kind of society do we want to live in? And that question obviously applies home and abroad. But maybe we could start the discussion by saying something about how COVID has impacted, the research that you're undertaking. For example, first of all, with Leon's research on residential alienation and how that's reproduced social injustice, and 3/4 of the population of Leipzig, are living in poverty. How have you had to maybe reframe your research trajectory in the context of these new challenges that COVID has thrown out?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, of course, it was a bit of a shock because when COVID hit Leipzig in March 2020, I was in the middle of my fieldwork and I was doing group discussions. And obviously that's the thing you don't want to do when COVID happens. But luckily I had a lot of support from my supervisors, and I took a break and decided to kind of reconsider my research design. And I shifted interviews to the phone, and I did some online observation of mutual help groups and things like that. And then in summer, numbers in Leipzig were really, really low. So I had renewed ethical allowance to conduct interviews like outside with distance. And so everything was slowed down and was more difficult, but it was actually, it could have been, let's say it could have been worse.
Okay, Georgios.
In my point of view, the impact of COVID in my research was not bad, because I had the opportunity to be productive during this period, and in addition, because I had to complete an online questionnaire survey. The fact that people spent more time in homes for me it was useful to find these people and complete my questionnaire survey faster.
Okay.
Of course, all this situation is unpleasant for everybody, but the impact in my research was not bad.
Okay. And Amina, I mean, you've already said a little bit about COVID, keeping women in the home, but I have a question on that. I also have another question for you in terms of the kind of professions in your research where you've seen gender discrimination, particularly for Black women and minorities. Is there any particular profession that you've actually, seen this kind of discrimination, as well as the impact of COVID on your research direction?
Yeah, I think the highest number of the women that I looked at, not by choice, because I was looking at public sector in general, but mostly they are in health and also social care. So we know that the impact of COVID on frontline workers has been huge. And for them, it's that intersectionality between being a Black woman and also being a woman. And then adding to that is being a migrant in a country. So lots of worries about their position here and how they need to just push forward in the job, whether they are ill or not, they have to push forward, which is usually not the problem that somebody who was born here would have. And also for the male counterparts, it's also when the woman is working from home, it's different, but for them, they have to go to the front line. Most of the people that I spoke to are on the front line, and so they continue to work. And that was one of the things. In terms of the, like Georgios, I think mine also worked to my advantage in a way, because when I was supposed to have some focus groups and also supposed to have face-to-face interviews, but all those had to be changed to everything being via Zoom, and that went very well for me because some of the interviews we had to do them when the women's children have gone to bed and when my own children have gone to bed. So there was that as well that helped.
Yeah, sure. And Jessica?
My having a prison research focus during the pandemic has been interesting. I haven't been able to go into prison since March last year, and it's looking likely that I won't be able to go in until late summer, realistically. So I have been dealing with kind of understanding that and moving that forward. So that is something that has just really rejigged my entire thesis. What it has done, though, has allowed me to have an interesting perspective on COVID within prison. So when the lockdown happened, the first lockdown, myself and a lot of other academics and researchers instantly went, this is so dangerous. There's going to be, a massive rise in suicides, massive rise in self-harm, really quite worried. That hasn't happened as much as we've seen. There have been spates of suicide, but the rise that we were expecting has luckily not happened, although any loss of life to suicide is horrendous. What has happened really it's revealed a failure of our government to really care for those who've been within prison. So that early release scheme that was announced kind of April time, that seemed really hopeful, that would have allowed kind of 4,000 people to be released early, non-violent offenders, with a very, very stringent release scheme, resulted at last check with the Freedom of Information check of about 300 release. It represents a lot about, if those people can be released early, should they have been imprisoned at all as non-violent prisoners or as non-violent offenders? And it's just revealed this lack of kind of care and apathy from the government for those who are imprisoned. Promises of phones and cells and video calls have really not materialised apart from a very few set of prisons. So it's been very interesting. It has an element of focus to my PhD that I wasn't expecting, but in terms of research, I haven't been able to collect data from prisoners yet, which has been an interesting source of stress, but also it's been fascinating to look at it from a different perspective and also look at it kind of from the legalities and the politics as well that wasn't quite as expected, and to see that people have been safe and that rise in self-harm and suicide wasn't seen.
Thank you, Jessica. Has anybody got a question for each other on the panel? Leon?
Yeah, I have a question to Jessica. I thought that your presentation was really, really interesting, and I was curious because I've read a bit about prisons in the US, and I've been hearing stuff in the news from prisons in different countries during COVID, and I was wondering whether in the UK there's any form of like self-organization of prisoners, so whether there's something like unions in prison, something like that, working on working conditions, and then also with COVID, whether there has been anything comparable, I don't know, to prison riots in Italy or something like this.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. In terms of kind of unions, it's not something that we see in English and Welsh prisons. Very informal groups, not anything kind of unionised or anything like that. The only time we do really see groups like that form is in the case of kind of riots and disturbances. In terms of kind of violence as a result of the COVID, it's not something we've seen. We've seen kind of minor disruption, but realistically, the sad truth of it is, since, kind of March time, prisoners were locked down about the same time as us. They've been in their cells for 22 hours a day to control the spread, because obviously for prisons, the risk is for staff coming in and bringing in, because prison staff, all of them are key workers, so the risk is for them bringing it in from the community. So we really haven't seen that level of violence, and I don't know if that is for a lack of willingness or for a lack of potential time. There has been some kind of work with prisoners having a lot of connection to prisoner radio and prisoner TV. There's been a lot more connection between prison governors and prisoners, in terms of prison governors being on wings and being involved with prisoners, but no such violence as such. That isn't to say that there is no anger or no aggression there. There has been, but we haven't seen kind of full-scale riots as we have in Italy. I mean, early research, early scholarship from people that have been able to go into prisons has reported almost a camaraderie among some prisoners, and it kind of, for a lot of them, their family were having to do it on the outside, and their concern has been overwhelmingly with whether their family and their friends are safe. For all of us, this has been concerning, even with all the access to news and social media and Zoom and FaceTime. So just imagine that fear of lockdown, but without being able to contact your friends and family and make sure that they're okay. But no violence, and unionisation isn't something that we really see, although I guess informally, definitely. But thank you.
Just before we continue, we've got a comment from the Bell Faculty of Research students, Dr. Adam Fishwick, and he said, "Fantastic presentations, everyone. He thoroughly enjoyed them." So, as we all have. And Professor Deborah Cartmel, who's our Pro Vice Chancellor, Deputy for Research, she has a question for Jessica. Just while we're still with you, Jessica, what open access training do you think the university could offer to prisoners at DMU, for example?
One of the most effective ways of working as an institution within a prison is to offer kind of prisoner student learning. I know that's something that DMU have done within Square Mile. Open access is difficult because you're working on kind of making sure that prison has that relevant access available to them. I really think that the best way to organise kind of access and education and improvement to prisoners is by following the format of groups like Learning Together, who offer seminars that are simply just taught by university lecturers or prison educators within the prison. Half of the class are prisoners and half of the class are students from the university. This is something that I and my supervisor and our team in the penology course are doing at the moment. We're currently, obviously with lockdown that's not happening at the moment, organising a debate with the team at Loudon Grange, which is a prison in Nottinghamshire. And that is something that we are working with to kind of ensure that just had to have a debate, different groups of people, that level of education, allowing prisoners to have that interaction with us, for our students to have interaction. The best thing that DMU could do as a university is to work kind of following the Learning Together scheme and start having these seminars. They don't have to be on prison work, they don't have to be on law. A lot of the time they aren't, they can be on anything. It would be really interesting to start up kind of work with all four of the faculties and start to have these in prisons. Unfortunately, Leicester Prison is training prison, local prison, so it might not be as possible there, where there's quite a high turnover of men, but there are definitely prisons around here in the East Midlands where a programme of learning together seminars would be something that would be absolutely incredible to see, and I think would make a real improvement to education and lives of those in prison.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Jessica. And I'm sure your research will be helpful when we start to put such an exciting programme together. That was brilliant.
Thank
and
you.
we have another, thank you. We have another question in the chat. Stefan Trevors, he starts off by saying, thank you everyone for the great presentations. My question is for Leon. Leon, in your opinion, to what extent is government's reluctance to address housing commodification and their marketisation a political choice? So to what extent is it a political choice for governments to be reluctant to address housing commodification and marketisation?
Yeah, thanks, Stefan, for this question. I think it can't be answered in a simple way, especially in Germany as a federal republic. It depends which scale of government you're looking to, and we've seen since end of the 80s a massive restructuring in like all the regulational possibilities around housing. So general tax subsidies have been cut, and that's definitely a conscious decision by people in the central government. But then if you look to the federal governments, you have to take into account that sometimes the development in the state that you're looking at, like Saxony in Eastern Germany, is really different from the city level. So then what the Saxon government does doesn't necessarily fit with the developments in Leipzig. And then you have the city government, and they have, as I said, been impacted by this urban austerity and also different mechanisms of rescaling. So I think in their case, it's often not a question of political choice, but of powerlessness. But of course, then if you zoom in even further, this kind of interdepends with, of course, like political conflict lines. And you have people who benefit from this context of austerity rescaling and who say, yeah, well, like in the neoliberal spirit, there is no alternative. And then you have people who are struggling it further from the left and who are trying to push for regulations, but then who are limited by their federal and national restrictions. So I would say it's really complex, and on one level, it definitely is a political choice, or it was a political choice made in the 90s. But then also it's a lot of just rescaling, mismatches, and how that like continues to path dependently shape the way you can regulate housing at a local level. So it's complicated.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Leon. We got another comment in the chat, this time from Professor Jo Richardson, who's the Faculty of Business and Law Academic Dean for Research and Innovation. And she has said, totally agree with Adam, these presentations have been very, very interesting. So thanks a lot, Jo. So have we got any further questions from members of the panel for each other? While you're thinking, I've got a question for Georgios. You talked a little bit about human capital and some of the sort of the traditional indicators of let's say status, social mobility, occupation, wealth, and social standing. So if we're going to promote the value of human capital and get away from these traditional hierarchical models, what are the sort of barriers to promoting social ability and seeing just how would you express it, even beyond education, in terms of improving kind of getting rid of this vulnerability for let's say third generation, second generation of immigrant families who've been traditionally marginalized in the workplace. So what are the barriers that you need to overcome to make sure that we have a sort of new approach to getting ahead, let's say, in life, in society?
We can see that there are differences among the countries. In some countries, the background of families play play not important role, like Scandinavian countries, Nordic countries, where the level of inequalities and social mobility inequalities are quite low, and social mobility is high. So we can take some of the measures that these countries apply. The most important barrier is the economic background of the family. But during my research, I realized that the educational background of the family play an important role. During the last decades, due to the explosion of education, the majority of people has access to tertiary education. But now the inequalities are going to another level about the quality of education, or what occupation people from advantaged backgrounds choose. So, in my point of view, education is the main mechanism that we can overcome these barriers, and at the same time to think about what some countries like Denmark, Finland are doing well, and to steal some ideas from these countries.
Yes, very good. I like the idea of stealing the ideas in these countries. Very nice. We've got a question from Lydia Edkins. This is another one for Jessica. She says, as two questions, I think. Geographically, is technology attainable for prisons more so in certain areas than others? And the second question is, does gender play a role in the attainability of education in prisons?
Thank you, Lydia. They're both really good questions. Geographics aren't so much of an issue in attaining technology. It's very much a money issue. So obviously in the UK or England and Wales, we have private and public prisons. So public prisons being HMP Leicester, Nottingham, all of those. And then we have Serco and G4S run prisons. Now, academics don't tend to like privately run prisons, just because the idea of your job being to kind of make money out of someone's liberty is not ideal, and that's a long and convoluted answer for kind of another time. But they have the money to be able to enact technology, and therefore prisoners tend to prefer private prisons because they are able to engage in more technology, potentially even kind of in-cell computers or phones, to be able to access their families. We know that prisoners having cells and phones makes a massive difference to be able to contact their families. They can do so any time of day. You know, if they want to talk to their kids after school, 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon, they can, or after dinner or after bath time, rather than prescribing to a kind of completely arbitrary time. And that's both sides of the phone call. For prisoners, it's a random time of their day, and for the families, it might be during in the middle of school time, or in a set time, a club or something like that. So that affects both. I don't think technology is necessarily a geographic thing. I just really think it's a financial issue, and one that people really seem to be averse to in terms of giving prisoners technology, despite the massive protective factor it gives in reducing violence, reducing distress, reducing chaos within the prison environment. Just having that connection to the outside world, to your friends and to your family, is huge. Obviously, prisoners, this is not no one really likes this, but prisoners do have televisions for those on enhanced privileges, do have televisions that access kind of the news and basic TV channels, but that is, again, down to finance more than anything else. And in terms of gender in education in prison, I'm not sure if it affects the attainability, but we know that females have a significantly more distressing time in prison than men do. Considering the kind of disparity in population, so females there's about 5 to 10% females within the prison estate compared to male. They make up an absolutely huge amount of the self-harm incidents and the suicide incidents. They make the most of kind of mental health care. There is that massive level of distress with females in prison. It's not my specialism, females in prison. There are some incredible academics out there that do research it, but they do seem to have a more distressing time in prison, and therefore their ability to react and engage with education is lower, due to the fact that a lot of women in prison, it is so far down their list of what they'd like to engage in. A lot of women in prison have come from significant amounts of trauma in their lives, and education for them is just not a priority. Their focus is potentially on the children, their family, and then any underlying addictions that need to be managed. I think that, again, if it's there, it's more likely that women could take it up because female prisons are generally smaller with less population. But I think that's very circumstantial. I think actually in terms of accessing it, women are probably more likely to not be engaged due to there being so many conflicting factors to their engagement. But thank you for your question. They're really interesting.
Thank you, Jessica. Anne Burrell has made a comment. She said, thank you for your responses. I would love to see a Finnish model of education adopted more widely. I've got a question for again, any of the panel really, is in the light of COVID-19 sort of exacerbating social injustices. I mean, we've seen, homelessness and food poverty, and the areas that you're working in have created a lot of challenges, and they've shown the weaknesses in the social fabric of society. Would you say, from your own research perspective, that perhaps COVID-19 will maybe be a good opportunity and has provided an opportunity to actually dig more deeply at these pressing societal questions, about what kind of society you want to live? Do you think on your own research that COVID-19 has presented certain opportunities as well as challenges?
Yeah, shall I? I think in terms of my, thank you very much. That's a very interesting question. In terms of my research, yes, certainly, because I think what COVID-19 has done is bring to the fore a lot of issues that were probably not that salient within the communities and across communities. So in terms of like overcrowding in homes and families, multi-generational families and things like that within migrant communities and ethnic minority communities in general. So there is an opportunity there to dig deeper into those. And also, one of the things with my research is looking at particularly women. There is a lot of discussion around young people and violence around young people and men being role models per se. But most of those women come to this country on their own with their children, or they are in single families, and women are now being looked at, the issues coming up, so that we can look at these women and see what their role is in helping the situation. And COVID-19 has certainly brought that to the fore.
Yeah, thank you, Amina. We've got time for one more question, and this is for Leon from Professor Joe Richardson. Joe says, it is interesting to consider the meaning of home and how it supports or constrains residents. What can we learn from this to understand issues with regard to poorly cladded homes in the UK post-Grenfell? Oh, that's very topical.
Yeah.
There you are, Leon.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. It's a good question. And I think actually I see a connection between Jessica's topic and mine, because I think both topics make us consider, well, she talked about private prisons also, but also the role of the state in both regulating and also just sponsoring issues of social reproductions, because prisons are a part of social reproduction, in my opinion, as well. It's where people live. It's where they either maybe change or where they, I don't know, are traumatized. And I think, of course, with homes, it's different, but there's this similarity that we can see, especially in the UK, coming from austerity measures, that these, as opposed to like spheres of production, these spheres of social reproduction just have been massively under pressure. And I think Grenfell is one horrible example of that. And so I think what we can learn from looking at housing from the lens of social reproduction is how much value it has for our society. And not just, I mean, in my presentation, I didn't talk about economic value at all. Some others talked a bit about how, I don't know, educational inequality is also an economic problem. And I could go on for hours to talk about like the value theory of social reproduction, but I didn't because that's too much for today. But also generally, just as a moral value in terms of social justice, I think we can learn that austerity is bad for us.
Absolutely. Well, thank you to the panel, and thank you for the audience for all of the wonderful questions. Thank you, Leon, Georgios, Jessica, Amina, you're in that order on my screen. Thank you for letting us share some of your fantastic research and contributing to World Social Justice Day in the context of COVID-19. I just want to add a reminder that on the 8th of March, we have International Women's Day, and there'll be a series of lectures to commemorate that day. Lots of exciting events at De Montfort University coming up in the future. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us. It's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.